In this first step of the structural modeling, we're going to have to first open a new file. But also let me tell you one thing in parentheses. You see we are working with Revit version 2025, which is Revit's newest version to this day. So I've opened 2025, and then I'm going to click on New to open a new template. You see, up to the version 2025, the available templates were divided by disciplines. For example, we had architectural discipline, structural discipline, MEP, and so on. But then since the version 2024, the default templates became multidisciplined. For example, if I open this drop-down, you can see that we have only two templates. One is Imperial Multidiscipline, and the other is Metric Multidiscipline. And here it really depends on the kinds of units that you're going to be using for your project. So in the older versions, our templates are divided by disciplines, but in the later versions like 2024 and so on, the templates became multidisciplined, and that's why we've got all of them here. Now, in case you didn't want to use these multidisciplined templates, you could still import the older versions templates in here and use the one you want with a specific discipline. But anyway, in order to make you more familiar with this new version, I'm going to continue by using one of these multidiscipline templates. And also I'm going to select this metric one because that's how the units for this project is going to be. Now we're going to wait for it to open. Now, as you can see here, the project browser of this template looks very different with a different organization. Like we have an architectural subdiscipline, coordination, electrical, and basically all of the disciplines are fit into one template. Now, normally this isn't a right thing to do, and usually we almost never try to model different disciplines into one single file, especially when we are working on bigger projects. That would just result in a very massive file, whereas there's usually a different team working on different parts of the project, and by the end we only link the files together. But still, there are some smaller projects for which we model the architectural and structural in the same file, and later maybe even the MEP. Anyways, this still is a template that you can work with. Now in the next step, I'm going to have to save this file. You see, we've got two options for this. We could either save our file normally, like we could go here, save as, choose a directory, and give the file a name, then save it. There goes the first option. Or we could make our file a central one. This one really depends on whether you are working single-handedly on the project, or if you're working on it in a group. In case your modeling process is a group work, you're going to have to make your file central instead of just simply saving it. But if it's only you working on the project, you have both options available. Sometimes your client might ask you to have a work set, in which case you're going to have to make your file central in order to create a work set. But if that weren't the case and it was just you working on the project on your own, you could choose not to centralize the file and just get a regular save from it. Now, I'm going to also give you a short explanation on the central files and the work sets for those who may not be so familiar with group works in Revit. But if you are familiar with that concept, you could just fast forward. You see, when we are trying to work on a file in a group, in the very first step, our file needs to be a central one. Now, what that means is that it makes the file able to be controlled by multiple people at the same time. Now, a file that can be remotely controlled by multiple people is called a central file. Okay? Now, what's the process of making our file central so that we could control it from multiple resources? The first thing you're going to have to do for this is that you're going to have to create a work set for your file. So in the first step, a work set needs to be created, and creating work sets is an essential step in centralizing your Revit files. If you don't define a work set, your file could never be centralized. Now on the other hand, as long as you have a work set for your file, that one is central. So these two things are codependent, as you can only have central files if you've got work sets. So don't forget to define and create work sets for your files before centralizing them. Now, how do we create a work set in Revit? First, you would have to go over to the Collaborate tab, where you can find the work set tool. So we're going to click on it, and then Revit would create two work sets by default. One for the levels and grids, and the second one is work set 1, which is just a default work set, and everything you draw besides levels and grids would go into this one. You see, work sets are pretty similar to the layering process in AutoCAD. Like in Revit, you could create as many work sets as you'd like, even more than the ones that you get by default. Then you could also give them new names, and also decide which items to go into which work set. For example, you could create a work set and name it walls, and then put all the walls you draw into that work set. Or you could put your furnitures in a work set called furnitures, or also put the stairs in a stairs work set. So you could create as many work sets as you want, and choose the specific items that you want to go in those work sets. So that makes it pretty similar to the layering in AutoCAD. And if you didn't want to create many work sets, you can always use these default ones. Actually, this is what we do most of the time. We don't create too many work sets unless we are required to. Now I'm going to click OK and wait for the work sets to be created. Okay, so after the work sets are made, this new palette opens called Work Sets. It says that we have 2 work sets here, and now if I click on New, for example, I can create newer work sets. Or if I don't like one of their names, I can go over here to rename it. But anyway, now we have 2 work sets, one for the levels and grids, and the second is work set 1, and also both of these work sets are made by default. So now the levels and grids go into this work set, which Revit is going to put in there automatically. Alright, so now I'm going to click OK, and now our file has work sets. Next I'm going to try to save the file. So I'm going to go over here and save as, and I'm going to choose a directory. For example, I'm going to go over here to a folder I've made and save the file there, as well as later the other project files. So we're going to go here and create a new folder, and I'm going to name it RVT. Now I'm going to go into this folder, and now I'm going to have to name the file. But before we choose a name for it, here's one thing. You see, if we go over here and click on the Options button, if you pay attention here, you can see that this box has already been checked, which also says make this a central model after save. Why is that? It's because this file has work sets. If you remember, we said that only when your files have work sets, they can be made central. So this box is checked by default. I'm going to click OK, and now I need to give a correct name to the file. You see, for most companies, you might have a different system for naming files, so companies could have their own specific naming standards, and if the company you're working with has one, you're going to have to go along with that. There are also some international standards, for example 1192, 19650, in both of which a naming standard was defined that you could also go by. But in general, you're going to have to give a name to your file that is legible, with a clear discipline as well as the date of the file, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to also mention something for those who want to centralize their files. You see, it is best that for every day that you work on your central file, you create a new central. For example, let's say that I create a central file today on, let's say, May 17th. But then when I come back to the file tomorrow and try to work on it again, I won't be working on that same file from yesterday. I just create another central from that yesterday's file, then correct its date to May 18th, and then work on that. Now, why do we do that? It's because a lot of times our central files may have some problems, something might happen to the file, and since we would be working in a group, there are more possibilities for newer issues than when you're working by yourself. Sometimes you might even have to go back to the file from 2 days ago to see whether this wall was deleted back then, or was it deleted by mistake today. These are just some of the details that you might want to pay attention to. So whenever you are working with central files, it would be really good that you create new centrals from your files every day, and also mention the date, and then work on the new central. So now I want to name this one. For example, I'm going to first put the project's name, as in I'm going to start with Kimia, followed by a slash, or you could just put a dash line. Then I'm going to write the file's discipline. This one right here is a structural file, so I'm going to put str, followed by another dash line. Then I'm going to put today's date, like I'm going to put 5/17/24. So this right here is just a standard naming where you can see the name of the project, the discipline, as well as its date. Now I'm going to save this. So now our file is centralized. Now let me tell you a very important thing about these central files. You see, we never work on the central files directly, as in it's not like anybody could go and open that central file and work on it and make some changes to it. Normally, we would have to create a local file of that central one and then work on the local file that we've created for ourselves. For example, let's say that you are working in a group of 10 people on a project and you have a central file for it. So you would need to have 10 locals. Each member would create a local for themselves and then work on that. We should never work directly on that single central file, since that's a very dangerous and risky thing to do, and it might mess with the file and make it not be opened, and then the whole central will be ruined, and it's definitely never recommended. Now this local file that I told you is connected to the central file, and whenever somebody is working on their own local file, once they click on this synchronize button here, that'll apply all of the changes that they've made to their local file onto that main central file. So now imagine that there's 10 of you working on the project, and for example, let's say that I am working on my local, and then I synchronize it by going over here and clicking synchronize. That will apply all of the changes I've made to the local onto the main central file, and if somebody else also synchronizes their file, they could see the changes I've made to the central. So that's how the information is transmitted between local and central files. Now, how do I create a local? You see, when you're creating a central file after you go ahead and save it, your file is still central. Okay, so how do we find that out? This has a trick. Central file save is always off and instead synchronizes on. So no save, instead synchronize. So when you see that, you understand that your file is still central and you're working on it directly. So you're going to have to close it and create a local from it. Now, how do we create a local? In the first step, you're going to have to close the central file. Then you're going to go here and click open. And then you go here and select your central file. After you select it, you're going to have to make sure that the box for create new local is checked, which means that it would be creating a local file from this selected central one. So if this box is checked, you're all set. And once I click open here, I would be in fact opening a local file. Now if you take a look up here, you can see that the save and the synchronize are on, which are signs for a local file. So when you're on a central file, the save is off but synchronize is on. But when you create a local for it and then open that one, both the save and the synchronize are on. Now this right here is a save file for me to use, and I can freely make changes to it. And every so often, which are usually in small gaps, I will have to synchronize it so that in case any problems occur, my changes are already applied to the central. Now I've only given you a summarized explanation on how these central files work, and in case you're completely unfamiliar with central files, I recommend that you take a look at Monroe College's group work tutorial package, which gives you thorough explanations on group works, stuff about central files, the errors that may occur, and things like that. So up to this point, we have opened a file, centralized it, which you could choose not to do if you're working single-handedly on the project. You could just go ahead and save it. And now we only have a ready file, and in the next step we could go ahead and make some more changes and readjustments, which in the next videos we're going to observe some more things that we need to do to our files.